Game-changing. The rules are clear. The alphas make the game, make the rules, break the rules, change the rules, and win. Based on what someone can get away with in addition to their conscience or lack of are also significant factors. Keep in mind that it's their game, their arena, and they really like to play. They are very motivated and know who will win even before the game begins. Most importantly, they do not play by the same rules they expect you to follow. And those rules are not made clear, in addition to the fact those rules can change without notice. The first time I met my cousin, who was almost a year older than me, I think, we were both about 5 or 6 years old. He had several younger siblings and thought he was, hot shit, even at that age. They had a huge house and were more athletically inclined, whereas my household was more artistic. Therefore, I basically knew nothing about sports. They had a large powder blue, I think, finished basement with a powder blue concrete floor where they could roughhouse, or at least that's how I remembered it. He wanted to play soccer, somehow with only 2 players, and since I didn't know how to play, he told me the rules. He said that every time I kick a ball against a wall, I'd get a point. He didn't make it clear that it was his wall, not mine, which would cause me to score points. I proceeded with kicking the ball against my side of the field, counting out loud until there were enough points for one of our teams to win. After a certain number of points, he just stood there watching me until he shouted, "I win." There are a lot of fictionalized tales of innocent people being abducted and trapped in some kind of scenario where they are forced to play games to entertain others, as often a form of punishment in addition. The Star Trek franchise has at least a few of these plots in addition to Star Wars, like Episode 2, the Hunger Games, and most significantly, the Tron franchise, which is a key point of the whole concept. The 2021 comedy film Free Guy is about a non-player character known by gamers as NPC. Is about a guy who realizes that he's in a video game and decides to be a hero. Free Guy is widely considered an underdog movie. The core narrative is a classic underdog story about a seemingly insignificant character overcoming overwhelming odds. If you ever have thousands of hours to spare, research and watch every underdog movie ever made. You will likely see fantasy portrayals and non-fictional stories of what I call results not typical. Very rarely will the underdog lose, and if she or he does, it will likely cause problems, especially with the entertainment industry in the United States. Terry Gilliam's epic film Brazil from 1985 originally had the hero lose. By the time it hit the screens in the USA, Sam Lowry somehow wins, thanks to some crappy edits and some extra crappy footage. Makes me wonder why Americans, compared to other countries, would have that much trouble portraying the realities of the low ranking in society that we would crap on a brilliant work of art like that, if you're into weird movies. I like to view the underdogs of society as being treated like those non-player characters. People who are there to support the winners, and if they are in some way allowed or forced to play games, cannot be treated fairly. One example in my life is when I completed a vocational program where they facilitated me and everyone else to get a $4,000 federal grant. A handful of the participants had a team of supporters where they were treated with a different level of respect. Meanwhile, the rest of us were alone, ignored, and treated unfairly. We all got the $4,000, but it was obvious to those in charge who was going to lose, and they refused to accommodate those of us with special needs and significant disabilities, although everyone was welcome to participate. They were not concerned about all the waste of our time and grotesque wasting of federal funds. They got paid and got positive press regardless. All they needed was a few success stories every year to stay in business and maintain their nonprofit status. I believe that there are alphas who don't know they are alphas, although some business development type leaders can spot them. This is also a tactic of success gurus, like a talent scout seeking gifted youngsters. They are a success scout seeking young, undiscovered alphas. They recognize and utilize their dormant born leader traits and further develop those abilities. They do not turn an underdog into an alpha dog. They find an alpha with dormant abilities and simply capitalize on it. Thus is born your success stories. Aside from all that scouting, sometimes all an alpha needs is $4,000 to put a down payment on a used roach coach to launch their pretentious and tiny business, making trendy crepes, and a few years down the road opening a snobby restaurant. Those are the rules of the game. You start the game as a winner, you win, and the game is over. You start the game as a loser, and you lose. It doesn't have to be in the stars. It's just the way of a status-obsessed world. I had a loser type for a partner years ago who also blew through his $4,000 grant and ended up remaining a loser. The game is rigged, unless you have a star on your belly. Going through their front door and playing their game by their rules will get you nowhere. They already have the power to win. In order for everyone to get that power, we have to somehow become lucky, get enough people to give us power, or possess other privileges. Otherwise, we need to change the whole game in order that the game is fair and worth playing. The first time I remember anyone mentioning the concept of a non-player character, with the exception of video games, was a discussion I had with a houseless lady in a trendy hippie cafe. Suffering homelessness, chronic illness, and complex PTSD. She was way more of an underdog than I was, and I wanted to listen, learn, and see if there's anything I can do to be supportive. When she mentioned that term in passing, I asked her to elaborate because I did not remember what that meant. When she referred to non-player characters, she was not talking about herself, but she was referring to most people around her. I thought that was an interesting way to see the world from her vantage point. I can't say I blame her. She's at the very bottom of this elitist community, looking up at these hyper-privileged people around her. And she sees them as mindless drones having no soul and nothing really to do with consciously advocating or advancing the world and fighting for a worthy cause, but pretending to do so. Although she reminded me a bit of someone who might sport a tinfoil hat, I saw her point. These people didn't seem lucid to her, and she is the one who is awake, and they are all in a dream. She's trying to find a way to work towards a higher purpose, but stuck in the gutter of civilization, distracted by just trying to survive. I have talked to houseless people from coast to coast, and I listen and learn a lot about this little thing I call reality. I don't see them as criminals, dangerous, or even a nuisance. They mean a lot of things to me, including a great way to learn about a town or a city. When getting settled in a new location, I always find some homeless people to hang out with. Sometimes I bring some beer and some weed. Most of the time, I just sit down with them and hang out. Never have they suspected me of being a cop or something like that. In fact, they assume I have a refrigerator box around the corner that I just crawled out of. It is a good way to gauge what it's like to be even lower in the pecking order than I have been in recent years. It's also a reminder of where I have been at times in my life when I was living on the streets. I can compare it to when I was a recognized and even a sought-after music teacher and accompanist, where I would go into a sheet music store and the employees would get excited to meet me because my students would rave about my work. During those high-status periods of my life, houseless people would not open up to me, nor would they treat me the same way as when I was experiencing social alienation. It just gave me more evidence that status has a sort of vibe to it, in addition to a lot of traits. Most people can sense it, whether low or high ranking, especially those who, for various reasons, rely on their intuition when they meet new people. I like to call it a certain energy that low and high status people have. If there were some kind of X-ray vision goggles I possessed, I would see personal power like this. A higher ranking person has thousands of wires plugged into them, giving them little currents of power from a multitude of subordinates while providing very little current to others. A lower ranking person might have the same number of wires, but their energy is constantly being drained by superiors, while they get very little power, if any at all. Their power is hindered and blocked as a result, and they cannot function without coping mechanisms. Being under the influence of an addictive or mind-altering substance tricks their perception to believe that their power is unhindered and flowing, and thus this delusional experience may even radiate with that what might seem like massive amounts of power, only to be let down after getting sober. As if they put their personal power into a sort of credit card debt, further hindering their ability to function and producing more depression-related issues. That is one way to explain why drunk people often feel more powerful than they are and start fights and think they will win, try to be center stage, and exhibit other traits of powerful people. Another trait I have noticed with the houseless, and not all of them are substance abusers, is what mental health providers would label as paranoia. In addition, many of these traumatized people feel like their minds are being read by the government or aliens that run the government, and no, they don't wear tinfoil hats, at least in my experience. It is likely that their way of explaining a sick society ruled by overrated, power-addictive alpha types who do resemble life forms that are not human. If you meet someone you suspect is paranoid, consider that you are probably just talking to a runt of society. That's what happens when someone is ignored, alienated, abandoned, and left for dead by everyone. If a mental illness wasn't the main catalyst for their demotion will cause insanity. Whether it was there to begin with or not, they will develop more symptoms and be put more at risk in a personal cycle of trauma. I do find it strange how paranoid some rich people can be. The deeper my nation falls into another depression, the more I hear people not only complaining about the houseless, or homeless rather, and even scared of them. Talking to one lady in a Class A motorhome recently, she was afraid just to drive past a homeless camp. Privileged people have a lot. Privileged people also have a lot to lose. They have nothing to be afraid of unless the whole camp somehow marches into their mansion, which will not happen. The houseless know they are nothing but a little honeybee. They can sting once, and that's it. Swat, and they're dead. However, fear doesn't think that way. It's not money and stuff that the rich are afraid to lose. It's their power. Some rich people have their personal power wrapped up in their wealth, while social media influencer has the power invested in their thousands of followers. If an investor makes enough bad investment choices, boom, no more money. If an influencer posts something bad, boom, no more followers. They live in a fear state of their own. It's based on perceived threats. The houseless, on the other hand, and most of their threats are not only very real, they have experienced those threats enough in the past to know how very real they are. After moving to a small remote town a few years ago, I read in the paper about the drug users and what to do about their problem. Their solution: access to tangible mental health programs? No. Their solution was to tell homeowners to install more security cameras. A neighbor on the other side of town had her little house broken into. When she said there was nothing of value stolen, she said that the burglar stole her remote control. Basically, whatever someone could grab in the dark and shove in a backpack. Who are the locals who are truly scared? According to the news, it's the property owners. This is the safest place I've ever lived in, and yet the privileged are still afraid. Those on top are winning this game of life. Those at the bottom are not necessarily trying to win. Many of them are just trying to eat. What if one of them has valuable creative output or the potential if given the right tools? What if one of those houseless people had ideas that could significantly contribute to the world? They are not even allowed to compete because they are not even viewed as being part of the game. Having recently found one of those useless community resource guides in a homeless camp, I did not see one resource that could give visibility to someone who needs society to consider. That gave me an idea, so I found out if there is such thing as community PR. But so far, I've also found that they are basically useless. Those of us who might have some skills, some time, some friends, and maybe just a few bucks can create working models for projects that can actually make a difference for hyper underrated people. That would be a game changer for so many unfortunate and valuable women and men who, whether they have something truly valuable, deserve to be considered to be an equal part of this unfair game we call success. But what about now? What about all the lonesome souls who don't have any power, any voice, any tangible resources to rise above the noise of the barking alpha dogs? You cannot win if you are outnumbered and outgunned. It's even worse when you're not even allowed to be in the arena and play. So many gifted players are settling for just being a spectator while the privileged are on the field. And some of the best players could be stuck in the bleachers. This is another reason why We don't necessarily need to help people to get in the game and to help them with the game. We need to change the game. If our leaders make and break the rules, if they have their own stadium and fix each match to end as they please, we not only need to have our own games and our own playing fields, we need to get them in our arenas and walk away from theirs. Unfortunately, they like to find ways to trap people in their boxing rings with their lead-filled gloves and hitting below the belt. For instance, coming up with some kind of frivolous lawsuit or abusing the legal system in other ways to force people into action. Resist as much as possible within reason and get ready to play a little game of your own. If you have a wow idea, I mean something that could really change the world, don't throw that precious baby into a wrestling match. Create your own game with your own objectives. Let's say your goal is to create, not dominate. Although be prepared for dominators who want to dominate what you create, because dominators, on a deep and sincere level, cannot authentically create anything entirely original. They are afraid that compared to your product, their product looks fake. The dominator says, if I can't create, nobody's going to create, and I will destroy everything I can so I can just sell my fake product because there are no other choices. For the love of alphas, Mark Twain is attributed to saying, a person with a new idea is a crank until that idea succeeds. I don't hate alphas. I don't hate people just because they are leaders or powerful public figures. There are famous people, living and otherwise, that I sincerely admire, based on what I may know about a certain leader, according to reports about how they shared their power and how others are treated by them, in addition to their contributions to society. I'm convinced that society, as well as history, has several well-intended and well-deserved leaders. I don't have a calculator handy, so I won't throw out any numbers. But I will say this. It's a tiny percentage of leaders who I believe deserve their power. It's a smaller percentage if we consider all the leaders who started out in all fairness, but got addicted to power to the point of no longer contributing significantly. However, they continue to be recognized as creating. For instance, a musical artist who had really good old albums and are now making more money by making shitty albums. Too many dominators are recognized as creators, in addition to the fact that there are, in addition, countless creators who began as creators and turned into dominators. I could waste a lot of words citing all the examples of unusually talented women and men who soon got burned out by the entertainment managers overworking them to the point of exhaustion. Here's the sad part. When you see a touring act that has been performing regularly for several years, you are likely seeing someone who's more like an athlete, not an artist. Chances are this regular performing artist is not authentically creating, but just a hyper-functioning person who somehow has the ability to capture and keep the attention of a huge fan base. I will name two of my personal favorite artists who have managed to moderate themselves to maintain their creative energy while not allowing the industry to totally burn them out to the point of losing their careers. Joni Mitchell and Peter Gabriel. Otherwise, many performing artists like Andy Partridge and Brian Eno focused more on recording and thus saved their music careers, although neither of them is considered to be a household name. My list of casualties who suffered permanent injury and even death as a result of being overworked is sadly nearly endless. Names of women and men who most people have never heard of, and a handful we know as public figures. The saddest examples I can think of are Syd Barrett and Nick Drake. In that same era are several women who, for the most part, never even got to a record deal and were cut down by the bullies of the recording industry. One name most of us have heard is our beloved Karen Carpenter. Her managers and peers who said, "We tried to get her help," were also the people who, in my opinion, led her to her tragic death. Other creative careers have similar stories. Writers, painters, actors, dancers, and models, exploited, used, abused, discarded, and forgotten. Gifted, touched, talented, innovative, creative souls whose ambitions are not based in competing and making a fortune are, for the most part, the creators that nobody sees. Sometimes these folks might manage to get themselves out there in some way, like strumming on a street corner, for instance, only to be crushed by the dominators and give up. The Mexican who saved half the world. And most of this audiobook was written within 40 miles of the Mexican border. In addition to various people groups and nationalities over the years, Mexican nationals and their food, art, and music have been very dear to me. However, I didn't realize in the last few years that a Mexican scientist is halfway responsible for saving humanity. Like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Claire Patterson saved humanity from nearly destroying ourselves with lead poisoning on a global scale. Remember, although lead poisoning wasn't the main cause of the fall of the Roman Empire, it was a major factor, especially among the elite. You may have forgotten about Dr. Pat. Well, he preferred Pat. I suppose Claire was a girl's name. Anyways, again, so I thought I would remind you. Here's another guy who you forgot about, or likely have never heard of. Mario Jose Molina Pascual Hernandez. He was the first Mexican-born scientist to receive a Nobel Prize in chemistry and the third Mexican-born person to receive a Nobel Prize. Chemist F. Sherwood Rowland and Mario Jose Molina Pascual Hernandez, simply known as Mario Molina, discovered the threat of chlorofluorocarbons in the ozone layer in 1974. They published a paper explaining that chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, were widely used as refrigerants and aerosol propellants, could deplete the ozone layer when they reached the stratosphere. This groundbreaking work later earned them a Nobel Prize and thus saved humanity from worldwide terminal sunburns. The next time you see somebody sitting on a Mexican, politely remind them that these people are not to be used as furniture, no matter how robust they might appear. In fact, it is people like this who have contributed so much to the world that they have gotten overshadowed by flashy talk show hosts. When is the last time you spent an hour in the sunshine and did not suffer from skin cancer as a result? Well, halfway. A Mexican because he contributed to about half the paper. I really don't mind if you have never heard of Mario Molina. You and I are still cool. But if you don't know who Guillermo Rodriguez is, you and I might have a problema. It is my hope that by the time this audiobook hits your ears, that Guillermo Rodriguez will not only have his own show, his own popular television show. I hope that he gets more popular than Jimmy Kimmel. See, this world needs more Guillermos and fewer Jimmys. Jim is dandy for sure, but it's just that Guillermo worked in a parking lot, and I think that's more admirable, in addition to him being more adorable. He's the kind of guy that has been lower in society, giving him a better perspective of what I consider to be reality, as opposed to those functioned in high society. Majoring at 5'2" also helps. Who knows? Guillermo might be the next guy who saves humanity. Aside from there perhaps being hope for humanity, there's hope for baboons. Yes, those big, ugly monkeys. It was baboons, or rather, a particular study of baboons, that probably inspired me first to consider social ranking as the problem that was making my life miserable. In addition, all kinds of people around me were miserable, even the ones on top. Therefore, in my quest for success, like Dr. Pat having to spend way too much time just trying to calculate the age of the Earth, I stumbled on what could be a boon for humanity with little to no answers, just mostly pointing out more problems. Dr. Robert Sapolsky's baboon neighbors those years ago encountered a tragic turn of events, a long time after they released his first findings about the harm of status-based societies. In this update, Sapolsky was grieved over the death of several baboons in the troop he had studied. Ironically, it was the top monkeys who ate the infected meat and died. This also led to an additional supplement in his discoveries. What happens if you place someone who is low-ranking into a healthier society? As much as I am disappointed in the community I'm currently living in, I must admit that compared to other places I have traveled to and have tried to live in the world, in various places in the Western world, I was given more opportunities here than I had since I lived in Alaska in my 20s. If you were to see a map of the world that color-coded regions that were marked with high status and related treats, like standard of living and the presence of large media-related corporations and connotations of posh art museums, etc., etc., you are likely to see the same map to determine the level of toxicity concerning the underdog. In other words, when people say things like, New York City is dog-eat-dog, what they're really saying is they are eating the underdogs, or the lesser of the alphas. Trendy towns are considered safe for artists, but they are not. They are safe for famous artists. Peers suffering from mental health issues or substance abuse recovery are sometimes instructed to change their environment as part of their self-care. Although this may not be realistically attainable, there is a therapeutic component. I would not say that a vulnerable person would necessarily thrive in a less status-obsessed environment. I would say that it would just be less harmful and likely to give them a better chance at living a healthier life. Changing your environment might be a significant contributing factor for some, although personally, most of my experiences were around the United States. And living and traveling throughout the nation has not changed the overall outcome. Followers often quote leaders who say things like, bloom where you planted, and the grass isn't greener on the other side. Although there's nothing essentially wrong with those maxims, these sayings need to be challenged in this context. In addition to, for lack of a better term, finding your tribe, so to speak. Adding practical self-improvement and faith practices to your lifestyle, in addition to forming new habits, are all part of an integrated approach. I personally like my secularized version of the classic Serenity Prayer. One of the most important things I have learned in the process, among a lot of other life-changing endeavors, is that in addition to barking more and wagging less, is that I am not to bite. If the alphas bite and I am to become an alpha, biting undermines the essence of the kind of society I'm trying to create in the first place, especially those of us who are creators and in careers based on improving humankind. If I want to channel creative energy in addition to producing healing and nurturing for others, harming our leaders would change that positive energy into the very opposite. Instead of responding with potentially harmful efforts, an example would be simply pointing out how others in your community or organization are being treated compared to those being mistreated, and sometimes asking why this is happening. Focusing strictly on facts, tactfully questioning our leaders to validate any unfair behaviors, and trying to find a healthy compromise to promote equality. In my experience, I rarely get past step 1 without opposition, but if I am just a honeybee in the situation, it's not worth dying over one sting. This is an example of barking as opposed to biting. Sometimes I inject a little of my rhetoric in these discussions regarding social ranking and status. I am always met with bewilderment as a result. Another reason to write more stuff like this. Take my advice. Always park near a cart corral so you don't have to leave it next to your vehicle, nor do you have to transport it very far. Don't be afraid of using microwaves. The newer ones are safer with the exception of heating liquids, and always heat and defrost at lower power settings. It's okay to eat and get in the pool immediately and hang out. Just don't swim very hard except for some walking. Fellini movies are actually boring, even if you understand Italian. Citizen Kane is boring. Koyaanisqatsi is boring. In fact, books are boring. In other words, don't let snobs tell you what to do. The truth is, nobody has ever actually enjoyed watching Koyaanisqatsi, at least while sober. They watch it only for bragging rights to impress their hip friends. In addition, if you park your car as close to the cart corral as you can, that's less walking to obtain and return your shopping cart. You can get in the pool right after eating as long as you're staying still. If someone is remodeling their home, don't tell them not to tear down a supportive wall because they already know that. Not all low-calorie sweeteners are artificial. Instead of buying a hair catcher for your bathtub, try a metal screen that's found in the kitchen aisle. Keep your phone charged as much as possible. Don't ever bring up Led Zeppelin. Everyone seems to have strong opinions about them. In fact, don't even bring up Led Zeppelin around me. I have strong opinions about them. I prefer the Monkees. Don't make a habit of biting people, especially leaders. No matter how tender they might seem, they will bite back, including all their followers. Don't also make a habit of wagging your cute little bushy tail, no matter how much other people prefer it when you remain quiet and sit behind in the spotlight, illuminating their precious little deities. Do not be afraid to bark when needed, and at times, keep barking until something happens. If you believe that you may have been cursed with perpetual failure, in addition to using your faith, bark more, wag less. The end. Carl Sagan said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence."